What was your paranormal experience? My father died less than 6 months after my daughter was born. She was not a good sleeper for her first year or so, waking up screaming and crying at all hours of the night. My wife and I would trade times getting up to soothe her. One evening not too long after my father passed, I was having a dream that my daughter was screaming in her bedroom. In the dream I got up and went to her room. But before I got there, my dad came out of the room and just said, "She'll be okay," and kept walking away, and the crying stopped. I shot up and then saw the baby monitor screen was on. It was on sound activated mode. So the screen only comes on when a sound hits over 60 dB and goes off after 3 minutes of quiet. I get up and check and she's fine and sleeping. A little shaken, it took me a bit to get back to sleep. I tell my wife about the dream in the morning. She told me she heard her crying, but thought I'd gotten up to calm her. Still a vivid memory in my mind nearly 3 years later, seeing my younger looking dad coming out of her room. My husband and I stayed at a super old hotel in Santa Fe, NM. At the time I did not really believe in paranormal things / ghosts, mainly because nothing had ever happened to me. The old room we were staying in had this decorative wooden chair that had a slanted seat. I took note of the slant because I wound up putting my computer bag on this chair and felt comfortable doing so. I'm super careful with my electronics, and the slanted seat made it so my bag slid all the way back into the back of the chair so it couldn't fall. I also hung a nice new dress on the back of the chair. We went out for sightseeing, and when we came back, my dress was on the floor near the chair. I wondered if housekeeping had touched it, even though we had do not disturb on our door all day and the room had not been serviced. Oh well. We ordered in some dinner and went to bed. My husband and I were laying in bed in the dark talking, almost falling asleep, when suddenly we hear a super loud slam. It was so loud, we shot awake and turned on the light. There on the other side of the room, a good 10 or 15 feet from the chair, was my computer bag. It was like someone had lifted it and threw it down. There's no way it just fell off the chair that far away, and the chair seat was slanted. It would be hard for anything to just fall off it. Close bracket. And it was a slam to the ground. I was so terrified. But my husband just shrugged like, "I guess this place is haunted like a lot of places in Santa Fe. Guess the ghost doesn't like stuff on its chair." I demanded we sleep with the light on. I didn't even have the courage to check if my computer was okay until the next day. The next morning my husband asked the front desk if the hotel was known to be haunted, and the guy just laughed and said, "Oh what? Did you see the little girl?" Apostrophe. I had a friend who was very sick at the hospital this past spring, not COVID, but sepsis from an operation on his back. I went to bed, and in that in-between stage, where you're not awake and not quite asleep, I could sense him standing by the side of my bed. We said a few words to each other, and then he hugged me. When I woke up the next morning, I found out that he'd passed not long after I'd gone to bed. Many people would say it was just a dream, but I know better in my heart. I felt that he was actually there, and I felt the hug. He was one of the most caring and inspiring people that I'd known, and it was just like him to say goodbye to the people who loved him. Something similar happened to my mom when her dad died. No signs he was gonna die. He wasn't sick or anything, and he was young. But she saw him that night when she woke up in the middle of the night at the foot of her bed, a few states away from where he lived. She found out then next morning he died suddenly in the middle of the night. Not mine, but one I think of a lot. I was at work one night and my mom was visiting my newborn son and wife. I get home and my mom tells me she heard my dad talking to my son. My dad died 8 years prior, but she swears up and down it was his voice. My wife heard it too but never met my dad, so she couldn't say much about it, just that it was a man's voice. Then it happened again when my daughter was born. I really want to believe my dad is watching the kids grow up, but he'll never know. I was visiting family and staying in a hotel with my boyfriend, husband now. The first night there we went to bed, and I woke up in the middle of the night facing the window. I noticed there was a dark shadow in the corner of the room that looked human shaped. After staring a while I realized it must have been a floor lamp, since that corner was kind of bare and that's the logical choice. I rolled over and went back to bed. The following morning I remembered this and turned to look into the corner where the lamp was on. There isn't a floor lamp there. The corner is bare. I mentioned it to my boyfriend and he went white. He told me that he woke up in the middle of the night because he felt like he was being watched and had to get up out of bed to go to the bathroom. I vaguely remember him getting up to try and shake the feeling. It still sticks with me in dark rooms. I'll add my own in here. I once was laying in my bed with my dog at the foot of it. I was on the cusp of sleep when suddenly my dog's pop her head up and locks onto something in the middle of my room. Her head then slowly turns and follows something I can't see. Her head stops again and my backpack gets knocked over after having been in the same spot for hours. Then all of a sudden a loud bang on my bedroom window. I was on the second floor of the house. I ran out of that room so quick without daring to look at that window. Oh my goodness. Do I have something for this? I'm going to cheat a bit. This was not my experience, but my dad's and what he has experienced in his life regarding this is far more interesting than mine. So strap yourselves in, cause it's going to be a long one, and let me tell you about his old farmhouse, aka the spooky house. Now for context, my dad grew up on dairy farms with his parents, who worked for a guy who owned multiple farms. So they would hop around to different farms and manage them, so to speak. Also, we live in Australia. Anyway, while my dad was in his late teens to early 20s, they lived in this house that eventually became known as the spooky house to him and his parents, and this what they experienced while living there. The house was known to have a very foreboding feeling to it, like something was always off and you couldn't put your finger on it. Floor was made out of old wood that had little notches in it, and Dad's mum put little stoppers in them to fill the holes. A lot of the time they would wake up in the morning and find that all of the stoppers were pushed up from underneath the house. Dad said they had these giant astropi beads hanging in the doorways, so big and heavy that it would have to be a big gust of wind to move them. He lost count how many times he would get up early for work or such and find them swaying like someone walked through them, but when he checked the bedrooms, everyone was asleep. I remember Dad telling me that it slowly got worse over time, like the house didn't want them there or something. At one point Nan contacted a psychic to see if they could make it better or calm it down. Well, the psychic wouldn't even get out of her car and come up the driveway. Absolutely refused to come inside the house. Nan was left flabbergasted and asked what she could do. The psychic told her to move house and drove off. Dad said not long after that these things would start stalking the house. To this day he has no idea what they were, and he doesn't really want to know. Nan would come out in the morning, find that the grass was pressed down or trampled around the house, especially where the windows are. Her peg basket on the clothesline would be ripped to shreds and bits of it spread around. Dad said she would get the shits cause she had to keep buying new ones, haha. It started to get more serious when Dad would be woken up by scratching at his window. On the outside, he was always too scared to look back at it, cause he knew whatever it was staring right back at him while scratching the window. They would check at morning to find that the paint had been scratched off the house at around human height and grass flattened. At one point, while his dad was out working a few paddocks over, Nan came in and woke Dad up, and together they huddled in his bedroom, waiting for daylight as the thing stalked around the outside of the house. Speaking of, it stalked Dad once too. He was walking from the house to his dad, a few paddocks over to help with the cows, about 4 AM ish. It was a cold and there was frost on the grass. As Dad was walking he could hear a crunch coming behind him. So he stopped, and it stopped too. Dad was like up and started walking again. And so did it. Again Dad stopped and it stopped. Now starting to get freaked out. Dad starting to pick up the pace and he stopped again. Only this time it didn't stop, but started to come right at Dad. Dad ducking bolted, ran over 2 paddocks and cleared the fences. Didn't stop till he reached his dad's side. Whenever Dad's parents left for a couple of days and he had the place to himself, Dad would host massive parties with his friends. They had the run of the house and could sleep wherever they wanted, but all of them always end up huddling up in one room when they went to sleep. One time it was just Dad and his cousin over. They played a game of pool and drank. At one point around midnight, The both of them were sitting around and heavily drink. A dark figure appeared and said go to bed. Dad said he was pissed drunk and thought why the hell not, and they went to bed. The next morning they woke up to find the game of pool that was left unfinished put away, and his cousin asked who that person was that was standing over their beds watching them sleeping. But Dad didn't remember that part. Anyway, there's more to that house that I can tell, but this is getting to be a very long post. Sorry about that. I will say though that Dad and his parents moved out and someone else eventually moved in. Not long after that, the house burned down. Dad didn't know what caused the fire, but he was sure as duck happy about it. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them if I can. Back when I lived in my very first apartment, I would hear what sounded like a little child calling for their parent. Now at first I thought it was genuinely some kid who was lost, because the complex was big enough for a kid to wander off from their parents. But the voice seemed to always be right next to me. It wasn't until I moved out that I found out a little girl was killed by her abusive father in the 80s. TDLR, little ghost girl was calling for her dad. IDK if this is paranormal, but it's definitely a bit freaky. So it was just a normal night. I go to bed. I'm still a youngish kid, and I end up having a dream. So it was my uncle who came to me in this dream, and his face was caved in, and he had blood all over him. His arms and legs were broken. All this gory stuff. Anyway, I have this dream and he says to me take care of your mother. So this is my mum's older brother. Anyway, mum comes and wakes me up in the middle of this dream and she's crying and upset, so I get out of bed and comfort her. She tells me she got a call from the hospital saying that my uncle had died in a motorbike accident moments earlier. Anyway, for about a week after that, mum was quite upset, and then maybe 10 or so days later mum tells me she had a dream that my uncle visited her and apologized to her and then drifted away. Anyway, I believe it's years later and it's his death day. Mum lights a candle to celebrate and whatnot, and I saw my uncle sitting on the couch watching over my mum. I didn't know what I was seeing, but it just disappeared into thin air. It was almost like I had a sixth sense. So me and my buddy are 14ish. We are sitting in his living room playing Pokemon and watching TV. When out of the blue his sister, who was 15, comes running in the room crying like a 3-year-old who dropped her ice cream cone. After a short time she calms down enough to get us to follow us in her room. She was in a flute class and had to record herself playing some music. She had left the record button playing, and in that blank space she had recorded a clear as day young female screaming. Now this was not a ghost story's random bit of sound. This was obviously a young female screaming. He had a big fenced yard, and next to her room was the garage. There was no way someone outside of the house could have screamed and been recorded that clear. His sister did no sleep in that room for 6 months. She deleted that recording that night to our disappointment. The only paranormal thing that have happened to me, and I really don't know how it was possible, happened at my aunt's place when I was a kid. Every once in a while, we went to her house and stayed the night, and I always ended up sleeping on the couch/sofa. Well, this was an old house with a room full of creepy dolls and the likes, but with those nothing weird happened, although my cousins would say that the dolls moved around. It had 2 floors with a stair in the middle that ended right where I would usually sleep. So every time, the moment everyone was asleep and not other sound was heard, I would invariably hear a marble being dropped from the stairs until it rolled down the floor, and this would repeat 5 to 6 times every night. No one plays with marbles. Everybody was asleep, so to this day I can't think of a reason for that to happen. A couple of years ago I had a dream reliving one of my childhood experiences where I was playing with my cousin, and at the end of the dream, when he was getting ready to go home, I said goodbye to him, and for some reason it felt different that time. A couple of days later he ended up passing away due to sudden death syndrome. Basically a heart attack, but he was 25, so it was very unusual. 3 years later to this day, every 2 to 3 weeks, I'm having very vivid dreams where I'm talking with him and having full conversations. My friend says it's my cousin reaching out to me, and while I don't believe that, I can't otherwise explain it rationally. Something I forgot to mention is he was born the same month and year as me, just 8 days apart, and so we'd been close friends since we were young kids. Close bracket. I can see the future sometimes. It's ducking weird as shit. Not like deja vu, but also exactly like deja vu at the same time. I'll have a dream and not think much about it, except oh that was pretty realistic, then what happened in the dream will actually happen. It's usually like 10 seconds. I don't really talk about it though, because people will think I'm insane or exaggerating. It's ducking weird. Happens like once or twice a month. That's called second sight, because when the event actually happens it's the second time you've seen it. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.